I walked into that office expecting numbers, not a nightmare that would rewrite my entire reality. The moment my accountant looked up at me and said, "Come alone, don't tell your son what I found in the books," something inside me froze. It wasn't just a sentence, it felt like a warning I was not prepared for. My heart didn't race at first, it dropped. Because in that instant, I realized this wasn't about taxes, or errors, or missing figures. This was about something hidden so deep that even hearing about it required secrecy. The room suddenly felt smaller, heavier, like the air itself was refusing to move. And before I even opened a single file, I already knew whatever was inside those books wasn't just going to change my understanding of money. It was going to change my understanding of people, trust, and everything I thought I could rely on. The accountant didn't start the conversation like a normal professional meeting. There was no greeting, no casual update, no reassurance that everything was fine. Instead, the moment I stepped into his office, I could feel something was off in the air, like the silence itself was heavier than usual. He didn't even ask me to sit properly at first. He just looked at me for a few seconds, almost like he was debating whether I was ready to hear what he was about to say. Then, in a low, controlled voice that didn't match his usual calm tone, he repeated the words that I still can't forget. "Come alone, don't tell your son what I found in the books." It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. Slow, deliberate, almost like a warning rather than a request. My mind immediately started trying to rationalize it. Maybe there was a mistake in the accounts. Maybe something routine had gone wrong, but the seriousness in his face shut down every normal explanation I tried to create. He didn't blink much. He didn't move around like he usually did when explaining numbers. He just stayed still, as if even small movements could break the weight of what he was holding back. I remember my hands feeling slightly cold, not because I understood anything yet, but because I could sense this wasn't about simple accounting anymore. There was something deeper, something that involved more than just figures on paper, and the fact that he specifically mentioned my son made everything inside me tighten at once. I started asking myself questions before he even continued. "Edway, my son. Why secrecy? Why this tone?" And the more I looked at him, the more I realized this wasn't a discussion I could walk out of the same way I walked in. When I entered the office and saw his expression, I immediately understood this wasn't going to be a normal financial update. My accountant, who usually greeted me with calm confidence and a slight smile, looked completely different that day, tense, serious, and unusually quiet. His eyes didn't meet mine in the usual professional way. Instead, they lingered on the desk, on the files, and then briefly on me, as if he was trying to decide how much truth I could handle at once. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost uncomfortable, like the room itself knew something was wrong before a single word was spoken. He didn't rush to explain anything, which was strange because he was always precise and efficient with numbers. Instead, he paused for a long moment, closed the door slowly behind me, and that small action alone made my heart beat slightly faster because it felt intentional, like he didn't want anyone else to hear what was about to be said. He gestured for me to sit, but even then he didn't immediately speak. It was as if he was organizing his thoughts carefully, making sure every word he was about to say carried the right weight. I could sense that this wasn't just about balances or reports, it was something that had surprised him too, something that had broken his usual professional composure. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was filled with unspoken tension, questions I didn't yet have answers to, and a growing feeling that I was about to hear something that would completely shift my understanding of my own financial life. He slowly opened the folder and placed it in front of me without saying anything at first, as if he wanted the documents to speak before he did. The pages inside were neatly arranged, filled with numbers, transaction records, and account summaries that at first glance looked normal, but the longer I stared, the more unsettling they became. There were entries I didn't recognize, transfers I never approved, and movements of money that seemed to follow no logical personal or business pattern. My accountant finally broke the silence, pointing at specific lines with a pen that slightly trembled in his hand, something I had never seen before in all the years I had known him. He wasn't acting like someone explaining routine errors, he looked like someone carefully revealing something dangerous. The way he highlighted certain dates and repeated patterns made it clear that this wasn't a one-time mistake, it was systematic, repeated, and hidden within what I thought were clean records. I kept trying to find a simple explanation in my mind, maybe a bank error or misfiled entry, but every page seemed to remove that comfort a little more. The numbers didn't just exist randomly, they formed a pattern that suggested intention, planning, and control by someone who knew exactly how to avoid suspicion. As I flipped through the pages slowly, I could feel my confidence in what I believed about my own finances starting to break down, because everything I thought I understood about my accounts was now being questioned line by line in front of me. As I continued looking deeper into the records, something even more disturbing began to emerge. Certain names and transactions were repeating again and again, and one name in particular started to appear so frequently that it made it impossible to ignore anymore. My son. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just coincidence, or maybe a shared reference in some unrelated entry, but the more I followed the trail, the clearer it became that these weren't random mentions. The accountant didn't even need to explain much at that point. He simply pointed to the highlighted sections and let me see it for myself. Transfers linked to accounts I had never authorized were somehow connected to timelines where my son was present or involved in some indirect way. There were payments that didn't match any known expenses, withdrawals that didn't align with any of my business activity, and patterns that suggested someone had been moving money quietly while keeping it hidden from my awareness. My mind kept trying to resist the idea because it felt too personal, too close to home, but the evidence kept stacking up in front of me like a wall I couldn't walk around. Every line I read made it harder to dismiss, and every explanation I tried to create in my head fell apart almost immediately. The accountant remained silent most of the time, only occasionally guiding my attention to another detail, and that silence made everything feel even heavier, as if he knew that the truth was already forming in my mind, but was waiting for me to fully accept it on my own. At that stage, I was no longer reacting like a man reviewing financial records. I was reacting like someone watching his entire belief system slowly collapse in front of him. The more I looked at the documents, the more I realized that my mind was struggling to accept what my eyes were clearly showing. I kept switching between denial and fear, trying to find any possible excuse that could explain away what was right in front of me, but every attempt failed almost instantly. The accountant noticed my silence and hesitation, and instead of rushing me, he simply allowed the weight of the evidence to settle, as if he understood that this kind of realization couldn't be forced. I remember my fingers tightening slightly as I turned each page, almost as if I was physically trying to resist what I was reading. There was a strange contradiction happening inside me. I wanted to stop looking, but I also couldn't stop because I needed to know how deep it went. Every transaction, every unexplained movement, every repeated pattern added another layer of discomfort, making it harder to believe that this could still be a misunderstanding. And the most disturbing part wasn't just the numbers themselves, but the growing implication that someone close to me might have been involved in something I never suspected. That thought alone made my chest feel heavy, because it forced me to question not just the records but the people I trusted most. The accountant didn't interrupt my thoughts. He just stayed quiet, letting the truth do its work, while I sat there trying to hold on to the version of reality I had always believed in, even as it continued to break apart in front of me. By the time I reached the final set of documents, something inside me had already started to shift in a way I couldn't reverse. It was no longer just about missing transactions or unusual patterns. It had become something far more personal, something that touched the foundation of trust I had built my entire life on. The idea that this was only a financial issue slowly faded, replaced by a deeper emotional pressure that I couldn't easily name at first. I kept thinking back to every moment I had taken my financial life for granted, every time I trusted that everything was being handled properly without question. Now, sitting in that office, every assumption I had ever made about control, safety, and honesty was being tested at the same time. The accountant remained calm, but his silence now felt different. It wasn't just professional restraint anymore. It felt like he understood that I was no longer just processing numbers, but confronting something much larger than that. I could feel a quiet shift happening in my thoughts, where the focus was no longer only on the accounts, but on the people connected to them, especially my own family. The possibility that trust had been broken at a personal level made everything more difficult to process than any financial loss ever could. I wasn't thinking in terms of profit or damage anymore. I was thinking in terms of relationships, loyalty, and truth. Each page I had reviewed earlier now felt like it was leading me toward a realization that couldn't be ignored, no matter how much I wanted to delay it. And in that moment, the situation stopped being just about records on paper and started becoming something that would affect how I saw every decision, every conversation, and every person I had trusted without question up to that point.